Before we get started with this video, safety first. We're going to be talking about another open air diode laser engraver. And so while this one does have a shroud that should shield your eyes from stray lasers and keep you a lot safer, if you have a pair of shaded glasses that you can put on, you might want to consider wearing them during the operation of this machine. Also, you are going to be cutting and vaporizing material, and so you're going to want to use this machine in only a well-ventilated area, a place where you can open a door, turn on a fan, and get the air circulating, because you do not want to be breathing the fumes that might be coming off of this. If you can get one, an air filtration system is also a good idea. Now, with that out of the way, I want to ask you a hypothetical question. You can only pick one of these choices. Do you want a machine that can make anything, but it can only make it out of plastic? Or do you want a machine that can take anything and make it beautiful? Now, of course, this is a little bit of hyperbole. Yes, I'm talking about 3D printers and laser engravers. And while some of these laser engravers can cut and can therefore be used to make something, for the most part, I see these machines used, a common use case for them is to take something else and engrave pretty sayings on it. In fact, a lot of people have a lot of businesses where their business model is to take a raw material and make it pretty, and then sell the prettified version of it. So I don't think it's unfair to say, in this hypothetical situation, are you a better match for? I think you know what my answer is probably going to be. This isn't the first laser engraver that I've used. I've used laser engraver units that come as part of a 3D printer in the past, and that went okay, but it was limited by the size of a 3D printer, whereas these dedicated units can be much bigger. But other similar laser engraver units that I've used were headless. I needed to get a computer and hook it up to it, but unfortunately, my computer is not in a place that I would consider well ventilated. Definitely not well ventilated enough for the sort of cutting that you're going to be doing with this machine. So I ended up not actually using that device, well, really at all. But the Pergear LaserStorm has a unit on it that allows you to store your G-code in an SD card, which you can then carry to the unit and engrave and cut directly from that. It's even got a fantastic user interface. Honestly, top notch, this touchscreen and user interface. I really enjoyed using it. And it's got an emergency stop button in case of, well, an emergency. But remember, if you do use that button, that when the emergency is passed, to give it a little twist and pop it back up, because it's not going to turn back on while that button's depressed. I found that out the hard way. My first test for this machine was to run to my local department store and get some bamboo kitchen utensils and then engrave some uplifting messages on them. And, you know, it worked really, really well. Honestly, it surprised me how dark and deep and absolutely effective this machine was at doing these engravings. In fact, it went so well that I decided after this I was going to see if it could actually cut through plywood. So I got a sheet of plywood and I made a little project where it would make a little keychain. My first pass at that didn't quite cut all the way through the plywood. My second pass, I increased the power, decreased the speed, and increased the number of passes to make more power. And it did cut through, but it got a little bit scorchy. I also tried using a trick where you cover the material with blue tape to try and prevent the scorch from getting on it. But even with that blue tape, it just prevented the engraving from being nearly as deep, and it didn't prevent it from burning. I think what I'm going to have to do to make this work is to basically just fiddle with the settings. More passes, a little bit less power, see if I can just, over time, cut through it. In fact, I got it to work with a sample piece of wood that they sent. This wood, it was much, much thinner, and instead of being a composite plywood, is a more consistent density. So it was able to cut through that very well, although I did over-scorch the outside just a little bit. For the most part, yes, this machine can actually cut wood, and that really opens up some possibilities. Now, I want to mention at this time that I was creating these projects in LaserGurble. Well, that's not entirely accurate. LaserGurble is a program for creating the G-code that runs this machine, but LaserGurble is, well, it feels like the very early days of 3D printing where slicers were extremely primitive. It was extremely rough, and LaserGurble feels a lot like that. Now, to their credit, Pergear has done an excellent job of documenting everything you need to know. Not just to set up and use this machine, but also to set up and use LaserGurble. But even with their excellent documentation, which I cannot praise them highly enough for putting the time and effort into making this, even with this documentation, if it weren't for the fact that I had already had experience with a much more expensive and much easier to use laser cutter, I probably would have been completely lost at using LaserGurble. I think I might make for you guys a video showing how to take a project from Inkscape to LaserGurble and then getting it out. Now, there is another program that is also mentioned in their documentation called Lightburn, and Lightburn is way easier to use. Lightburn is, however, a commercial product, and you need to pay for it in order to use it, although you can have a small trial. And I activated that trial period to try and use it, created this project again using Lightburn, and it didn't work when I exported the G-code and tried to run it on this machine. The laser just never fired. So I've got to do some fiddling with Lightburn to get it to running. If I can get Lightburn running, this machine will be 10 times easier to use, or at least 10 times easier to design for. Now, I did try taking those woodcut settings and cut through a small piece of acrylic that I have. White acrylic. It's about 1/8 of an inch, but it didn't even scratch the surface of the white acrylic. Now, that's partially because of the limitations of the blue light laser diode that they're using. The visible spectrum of light, instead of being absorbed by white material, instead gets reflected by it. It's what white does. It reflects visible light. So if this were infrared, it might be able to cut through this material better, but as it is, it just cannot cut white or light colored things very well at all. You're better off cutting darker colored things. That's just one of the limitations of this particular tool. But that being as a limitation, there's still a lot that you can do with it. Like I said, I have access to a better laser cutter, a CO2 laser cutter, and with that machine, I can actually take a 3D print and vaporize about 1 millimeter of material from it, and in so doing, do incredible details. I used this to make a couple of LaserPog slammers for my LaserPog project, and it's really amazing the level of detail. So I wanted to know if this could vaporize PLA 3D prints and do something similar. So I printed a couple of slammers. One of them I printed in white without thinking about it, and then I said, oh, it's not going to be able to engrave the white, and sure enough, it barely scratched the surface of the white. But the other one's a darker color, so I thought I'd give it a shot. However, I ran into a problem with scaling the image that I use. I didn't scale properly, so it's too big. But nevertheless, it did look like it was cutting into the surface of this just a little bit. However, I also printed this wrong. I need to print this with like 80% infill. It should be practically solid. With infill on the inside, I'm just going to cut through to the infill and just leave a hole. So I tried again. This time, though, I thought I would take advantage of the fact that it can't cut through white, and I would print, about 1 millimeter on the bottom, then a bunch of white, then 1 millimeter on the top, and then I prepared the logo file for it and tried cutting it. However, I made a mistake. I accidentally swapped the speed and power settings when I was making that, so it was essentially cutting at 100% power, but 30% speed. It was going very, very slow, and thus it was depositing a lot of heat on every little part that it was engraving. And the result was a slimy, melty, goobery mess that, honestly, I think it cut into the white now a little bit. Apparently you can cut white material if you just go slow and hot enough. Get the settings right, get the scale wrong again, but do the cutting and engraving again, and it's looking promising, but it's still not perfect. And those super fine details that I was able to get with the CO2 laser, this one can't quite reproduce. But I don't know if that's because I was putting just a little bit too much heat and it was getting a little bit melty, or if the diode laser just can't get that pinpoint accuracy and it's just a little bit more defocused. I'm not sure. I ran this for many passes at a lower heat, hoping to eventually cut through, and it just never quite made it. And, I need to keep playing with it. I need to keep dialing it in. I think eventually I'll be able to get it. Now, at this point, you might be thinking, man, this review seems a little bit incomplete. At every step of the way, he's saying, well, I got to keep playing with it. I got to keep playing with it. Why am I making a review before I get a chance to fully test this machine and find out if it can actually fully do these things? Well, it's because this machine is hard for me to use, and that's about my personal circumstances. Like I said, the space that I have to use this, that's well ventilated and away from the family living space, is this corner of the garden shed where I record my videos as well. So I can only use this out here. And because, unlike a 3D printer where you can just make sure that it's going good and then walk away and then come back and check on it, you should never, ever leave this machine to run unattended for any length of time whatsoever, which means that I can only use this machine when I can be here while it's running the whole time. That limits me to using it on evenings and weekends, and that's about it, really. So I've got a limited window that I can experiment with this machine, and it's big. It's taking up all of this space. I cannot use this space for anything else while I'm using this machine. So it's big, it's blocking. It's part of the reason why I haven't done any other videos, because I've just had to keep testing this machine. And if I don't get it out of the way, I won't be able to tell you guys about some of the other cool things that I've been working on. So yes, this review is stopping short of mastery of this tool. I can only use it in short spurts at odd times, and I just have to get it out of the way for now. But I do hope that I will be able to return to it soon and keep trying to perfect the settings on this machine in order to, well, really open up my ability to make more things. But one thing I can tell you is, if you would like to get into laser engraving, this is, in my opinion, the base level. I would not go with anything cheaper or less capable than this. I think that this is the one that turns that corner into actually being functional and usable. Just give yourself lots of time to learn how to use it and master it and play with it, because it's super promising. It's super capable. I am super impressed with the Pergear LaserStorm S10. While you're checking out this cool thing posted by one of you on the WHATCHAMAKIN channel on my Discord, why don't you open up the cards and see what deep dive into the topics of this video you can do. And this is really cool. Yeah, I really enjoy it when people connect with me on social media. That's why I've got links to all the socials in the description, and I hope you'll check them out. I've also got a Patreon, which you can check out here, and I'll tell you a little secret about the suggested videos. This is the one that YouTube thinks that you'll like. This is the one, though, that I think you'll like. Which one of us is right? Only one way to know for sure. Gotta watch them both. And remember, safety first, because I really do care about you, and see you next time.